when I say I wrote it to myself, I really mean there were times in that book when I was wagging that finger at myself going, this is what you should be doing. You need to read this stuff and not only read it and write it, but practice it. Don't just talk the talk, but walk the walk.
Welcome to the My Future Business Show, where we get you in front of your best audience and keep you there. Not only are we interviewing the biggest names in business to help you become even more successful, we're inviting you to book your spot on the show to help you grow your business. So at the end of the call, make sure you fill in the interview application form at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. Hello and welcome back to the My Future Business Show. It's Rick Nusky here. I hope you're doing well no matter where you are in this wide, wonderful world of ours. Now on today's show, I'm with the wonderful John Jack. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you. Great pleasure to be here, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's absolutely my pleasure. Now, for everybody who is on the call with us today, this is going to be a wonderful treat in how to live life, how to write books. Just so much is going to be shared on today's show. But before we do that, John, I think what's going to be important is to provide just a little bit of context aside from the book, which is going to be the main focus of today's call, in terms of who you are, your background, and how it was that you came to write this wonderful book.
Gosh, sure, okay. Well,
the condensed version.
I was born in the year 1900. No.
Me too.
I feel like it some days, right?
Oh yeah.
I'm an actor by trade. I sort of, my mother was a writer, so I'd been around writing and words in one form or another, whether it be the written word of my mother or the spoken word of my own profession, all of my life, really. And so, writing a book was something that kind of, it didn't faze me, it didn't really worry me in terms of, the sort of, the geography of doing it, because I'd grown up with a mother that was always scribbling away, and she was always having to send away manuscripts and her poetry and all sorts of things all over the world. So from just being a wee boy, like a toddler, I'd been used to seeing this kind of thing, So, and the wonderful thing about my mother was that she'd written, she was a poet, a Christian poet. Well, that doesn't sound like the kind of thing you could be very successful in, but she was.
Yeah.
And she was sort of published on both sides of the Atlantic, I believe. But she wrote in the most wonderful iambic pentameter. There was a rhythm to her writing. And looking back, it's the same meter that Shakespeare uses, so it's very little wonder that I became an actor when I grew up, because it's the same rhythm that Shakespeare and lots of other classic writers use for the stage, So I'm an actor, and this book came out of a period of my life where I'd gone through some tough stuff, and it was, I think, we were talking just before we went live, and I'd said, this was something that I wrote for myself, sort of to myself, and during this crisis, I'd come very close to publishing it several times in the last sort of 10 years, and always kind of shied away from it for various reasons. One of them because it felt a bit too personal, actually, even though it's not really in any way autobiographical, but the stuff in there is kind of the stuff that I've dealt with in my life, But coronavirus came along, we all went into lockdown, and I thought, if ever the world needs a book like this, it's now. So here it is, and you've been kind enough to read it, and I hope other people will as well.
Oh, it was a wonderful read. In fact, I became quite emotional throughout different sections of it, and I also felt like you were talking directly to me. So I think in that, John, is where the power lies. How was it that you came to, this is just, you can tell that you've had experience in writing through your mother, and of which I know you love dearly. It was obvious to me that the words flew off the pen. Was it easy to write, even though there was some tough stuff in there?
I think that's a really interesting observation, Rick. They really did flow off the pen. My mother used to talk about, and she was a very religious woman, and she used to talk about, because she was very talented, and I used to get really angry with her because she wouldn't take any credit for it. She used to say, no, I just get to hold the pen, and the divine inspiration comes through, and it's not really my words. And I used to get angry with her because I used to say, come on, you're really talented and you're doing this stuff, and why don't you take some credit? In writing this book, I kind of got an insight into what she was talking about, because it really did flow. And there were times when I genuinely felt like I was tapping into something which was not just of me, and that sounds um, maybe grander than I mean it to sound. I
Mm-hmm.
mean that in the most humble way possible. I really do. But there were times when I would read back what I'd written and go, "Gosh, that this is new to me," and yet it came out of my pen.
Yep.
And in those days it was analog. When I used to write that book longhand in jotters and notebooks around the cafes of Soho in London, where I lived at the time.
Uh-huh.
So, it's a really interesting observation, that, because that was an observation that I had myself on many occasions when I would read it back and kind of go, God, where did I get that from? I had absolutely no idea where that came from. So it's interesting, and I do wonder if there is a kind of a deeper wisdom that we hold within us that we kind of have forgotten how to tap into.
Yeah.
And something, whether it be the situations that I was facing at the time, or there was perhaps an element of desperation there. They call it the gift of desperation. I don't know what it was, but something maybe allowed me to tap into something deeper, because I do think we know all this stuff. I do, but I think we've kind of forgotten it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think through the eons of time, and as we go from generation to generation, John, we seem to either suppress, like you say, or forget, like you say, all of our wisdom. And that's what I took from this book, was that it's a book full of wisdom, and you seem to have an abundance of it. And at the end of it, one of the things that I noticed, and it really hit a chord with me, struck a chord, was that life is fleeting. Now,
Absolutely.
when we're standing there in our younger clothes, as it were, as young individuals, we think we have all the time in the world. What would you say to, I guess, in a roundabout way to unwrap this book? What would you say to young people who think that they have forever?
I put pen to paper on this book when I was 29, and I published it when I was, well, I am 40.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back at the first time that I set pen to paper on that book, it seems like a heartbeat ago. I mean, it really does.
Yeah.
And I think from the sort of the aspect of someone who's, because it's been very interesting publishing this as a quite considerably older person who wrote it, and looking back at some of this stuff. And yes, there was some stuff that I took out. And there was some editing that went on, but 98%, 98.5% of what's in there has remained true. And I went through that with a fine-tooth comb.
Yeah.
Before I put it out with an editor, before I put it out to publish. And, looking at this stuff and going, gosh, this is universal. I do feel the same way about this 11 years on from writing it as I did when I wrote it. And I think that sense of, it's that wonderful, the Victorians and their predecessors, we kind of lost it after the Victorian era, but they used to have that thing of memento mori, remember death,
Mm-hmm.
and that sounds terribly grim, but it is without wishing to be morbid, it's a fact. We
Absolutely.
are on a very short journey here
Yeah.
in life, and from what we've seen over recent months, it can be a lot shorter than we expect it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And our ancestors, and I mean our quite recent ancestors, Rick, were
Yeah.
not ashamed. They weren't disgusted. They weren't in any way freaked out by the idea of memento mori. If anything, they used to have it on pendants. They would have it in and around certainly in and around their churches, but on occasions they would have it in their house, because it would remind them, first of all, be decent people. But secondly, it would remind them to make the most of each day, because there will come a time when those days will run out. So I think for me, this whole crisis has been an exercise in redoubling as a human being, and I do think there's a level of social trauma involved, and I do think that's something we'll have to deal with. A piper will need to be paid for this
Oh, yeah.
emotionally on a global scale further down the line. But for now, we're still in survival mode. But what it's certainly done for me is it's certainly made me far more aware of how fragile my existence is, and those of other people. And I think in the long run, that may not be bad. I think if anything positive comes out of this crisis, it may be that, you know, perhaps we take life a little bit more seriously than we have before. I think it's only in the last, not even 100 years, last 70 years, that we've really had not to worry about diphtheria, polio, you know, the kind of thing that would have been commonplace to our, not even our great-grandparents, but our grandparents would have known this stuff. You know, in the West, we've known very little of war. We've known very little of starvation. We've been very spoilt, I feel, in the West. We've lived a very safe, secure, cradle-to-grave healthcare sort of life. I understand not everyone gets it for free. I live in the UK.
Yeah.
But what the point is that the medical knowledge is there, you know. And so this virus, if it's done anything positive, it may be to remind us that that's something that is a privilege, it's not a guarantee, you know.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I'm certainly a lot more grateful for what I've got than I think perhaps I was at the beginning of this.
You know, you wake up of a morning and, you know, gives you a renewed, I guess, view or perspective on life. If you get to see the sunlight, you get to hear the birds chirping and take in a breath of fresh air, that there has to be something to be said for that, doesn't there?
And I don't know about you, Rick, but it's made me very grateful for my home. You know, I'm very lucky. I have a lovely home, and I don't know that I perhaps appreciated it the way that I do now. That you know, we're kind of all forced to spend and have been forced to spend so much time in our homes recently, and I've become much more grateful for a safe and a nice and a comfortable place to live. And that's very basic stuff. But I think, you know, for me, it's given me a lot of joy to get back to basics and you know, kind of look around and feel safe and use my kitchen because I've got more time now and be able to do those odd jobs around the house, you know, and taking joy in it. Pleasure.
Just the basic things, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'd love to, you know, just go back a little bit on your acting career. I don't want to talk about it directly, but I want to talk about it in the context, John, of how it's shaped your life. And now, because at that time, before the pandemic hit and you were very busy, time flew by. Before you know it, you woke up and next thing you know, you were going to bed. How do you take steps just to slow down?
And
how important is it?
For me, it's very important because I'm quite a driven, highly strung person, and there's a lot of energy within me. There always has been. I've sort of got, you know, sort of ants in my pants, as we say in this country, you know. And I will often. Years and years ago, I had a flatmate. She was a landlady, actually, when I lived in London years ago, but we were like flatmates. And she used to say to me, you know, you came in last night after a hard week and you said, you know, tomorrow you're going to sit down with the Sunday papers and you're going to have your coffee in the conservatory and you're just going to sit there all day. And she said, within 5 minutes, you've made 4 phone calls, you've gotten ready, you've ran out to the shops, you've come back, you've done this, that, and the other. So I'm not a person who naturally relaxes very well. And if anything, this crisis has forced me to sort of stop. I mean, I think it's brought its own exhaustion with it, mental exhaustion. There was a point where I stopped listening to the news because I was making my morning eggs to the daily death toll, and that's not healthy, you know. So, you know, you have to sort of take a step back from that. But if anything, it certainly has given me time to reflect. It's given me time I'm 90% through the second volume of this book. It's given me a perspective to be able to do that. But in terms of doing nothing, in terms of simply relaxing, it's become clear to me that my mental health is as important as my physical health. And I never really, perhaps for a long time, have thought much about that, you know. But nothing will make you look at your mental health more than being surrounded by a daily death toll, you know, and governments who say, sorry guys, we don't know what to do about this and there is no cure, sorry, you know. Nothing will affect your mental health and living with that, you know, on a day-to-day basis. So it's become important to me that that I take time out in nature. I no longer live in London. I live in Glasgow now in Scotland, which is a beautiful city, and we're very lucky here. We have lots of beautiful parks and country walks around, and I've been really utilising that. I've done a lot of reading. I've taken more time to do that. Cooking. that's a great exercise in self-discipline, and there's almost a meditative aspect to
Oh yeah.
cooking, which I've really enjoyed as well. So it's become clear to me that I'm a person who probably works better if I force myself to take a rest. But I have to say, it is something which I have to force myself to do rather than
Force
something
yourself
that
to do.
comes
Now slow down.
naturally. Absolutely, absolutely.
The spring will unwind in time. I think about your you've talked about your mental health. Now I'm thinking about your physical health. Do you find that I guess is I'm not sure of the restrictions in your area, but what about your physical health? Are you focused on that, and how
Very
does that
much
look?
so. To do my job, well, the job I used to do before my industry closed down.
Hmm.
Yeah, to be a working actor, you need to be at pretty peak physical health, particularly if you are a stage actor. You can get away a bit more on film and television with being a bit more of a less sort of peak physical health
Hmm.
person. But in theatre, particularly I used to work a lot in the West End in London, in shows like Phantom of the Opera and Shout and that kind of thing. And they require you, in Shout, I had 21 costume changes in a 2-hour show.
Oh wow,
So it's, you need to be fit to do that kind of stuff. And you're doing it 8 shows a week sometimes. And so it does require you to be fit, to be healthy. I go to the gym. I don't eat as well as I should because I'm Scottish and therefore I have an inbuilt sweet tooth. And in fact, I don't have a sweet tooth, Rick. I have sweet teeth, plural. Um, you know, but I do what I can, and I walk a lot. I'm about to adopt a dog, a failed sheepdog,
fantastic.
and those border collies are very intelligent, very high energy dogs, so
Oh
that will
yeah.
keep me better. So yeah, it's kind of and actually this process, I don't think I would have taken on a dog that needs this much effort and help. He's coming directly from a farm. He's
Oh,
never been a house dog. He's a year and a half old, and it's going to be a big challenge. And I wouldn't have had the time to do that had there not been for this lull. So there have been some positives in it for me, and I hope by the end of this I'll have a viable dog.
I think what you should prepare for is some chewed bits and pieces around the home
Oh, I
too.
think so. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, that's not so much the worry, it's the potty training that's the worry, but
Oh yes, it'll all come in spades, I'm sure. Now, I'd love to, if we could, John, is to maybe spend some time, if it's okay, to unwrap each section of this book because there are
absolutely.
sections on here, like I mentioned earlier, that drew out some deep emotions. And one of the ones, let's just start with the one on love because that made me think, about how when I was a younger man, I used to go out seeking someone that was of interest to me, and I would actively pursue them, and it would never work out, and I never understood why. And you talk about this very scenario in the book. Just talk us through some of these wonderful chapters.
I think my first response to that would be same for me, Rick.
Yeah.
I mean that I think what you've just described is what I did for years.
Yep.
People used to say to me, "Oh, those well-worn, sort of pithy epithets. Love comes when you least
Expect
expect
it.
it.
Yeah.
The minute you stop looking, that's when it comes. The kind of things that can make you want to sort of punch somebody in the face really when they're saying it. And let's be honest, we've all thought that.
Yep.
But it happens to be true. And over, I'm for some reason, I don't know why, Rick, I am one of these people, and maybe it's if there's any reason behind any of these things, maybe it's so that I can write about it for other people, but I seem to be one of these people that's hardwired to learn things the hard way. I don't know how you feel about that, but
Hmm.
that's definitely true of me. And so I will bash my head off that brick wall continuously until it kind of gets through that thick skull that this isn't working and maybe I should try something else. And so in terms of that chapter came out of a lot of trial and error, a lot of trial and error.
Oh yeah.
And, in terms of stuff like that, I can fall back into those patterns very, very easily. I'm in a lovely relationship at the moment, and it's very nice. But further down the line, should anything happen, in those quarters and it doesn't work out and I end up back on that scene again, I may find myself very easily, sort of going down that old path again of making those mistakes, and I might have to read my own book.
Read your own
Um,
book.
so for me, it's when I say I wrote it to myself, I really mean there were times in that book when I was wagging that finger at myself going, this is what you should be doing. You need to read this stuff, and not only read it and write it, but practice it. Don't just talk the talk, but walk the walk, And that passage about love came very organically about the animals and the woods and sitting with your offerings. And I don't really know where the poetry of that came from. It's perhaps a little bit reminiscent of Khalil Gibran or Rumi or something like that. But, whatever it was that I was influenced by at the time, but it certainly came from a very, very profoundly deep place. And I knew it was true when I was writing it. And it still took me time after that to implement that stuff, even though I was writing it to myself,
Yeah.
But it was, that and the stuff about the recipe, where it's all very well and good, you can do everything right, and you can treat people properly, and you can approach relationships and love in exactly the right way. But unless you can learn to love yourself, then you're likely to fall into patterns of behavior which are not conducive to successful and healthy relationships with other people. And I found quite a poetic way of saying that, but that's what it boils down to. Self-love is you need to start with yourself. It's a hackneyed old cliche, but it's absolutely true. Because if you cannot be true to yourself, if you cannot find that compassion and that respect and that compromise and all of the stuff that makes relationships difficult but also wonderful, if you can't do that with yourself, you have no chance of doing it with someone else successfully, in my experience. Perhaps other people would disagree with me, but that's certainly been my experience time and time and time again.
There's lots of good chapters throughout this book. I wonder, for you personally, in reflection, which one had the most impact on you? I know love's a very, very strong one, but was there one that particularly stood out for you?
There are a couple actually that really stood out for me. I loved from a creative writing point of view. I loved writing Pride. I loved retelling the story of the fall of Lucifer, and the drama of that. My mother was a Christian writer. My father was a pastor. He was a Pentecostal pastor. So I grew up in the church, and I really, really enjoyed writing my own take. I hope theologically accurate as far as the traditions go, take on that ancient story, but the drama of it and the power of it was something that I not only enjoyed writing, but I really enjoy reading back as well. If I'm able to take any pleasure in my own writing, it's possibly in that chapter. But in terms of what spoke to me, I remember crying actually when my editor read back to me the chapter on gratitude, and just how important to me gratitude has become, because it's not my default setting. I'm not a naturally grateful person. I'm a driven person. I'm an ambitious person. I exist in what is potentially the most mercurial and challenging and cutthroat industry in the world, possibly.
Yes.
With perhaps the exception of the financial industries. But, my default setting isn't always gratitude. My default setting is, right, what's the next thing? What's the next goal? This is great. We've done that now. Move on. And for me, gratitude is something which I have to consciously practice. And my God, does it work? It really, really does. I when I was about 28, so about a year before I started writing this book, and I talk about this very openly. Some people choose not to. I don't have a problem with it. I entered into a 12-step recovery program, and I'd gone through some alcohol issues in my life, and I decided to take the step and fix that. And I remember hearing this in these meetings time and time and time again: gratitude, write a gratitude list, practice gratitude. And I'm sitting there thinking, I've got real troubles. What's everyone going on about gratitude for? I need my credit card debt paid off, and I need to be able to sort out this habit that I've got, and I need this, that, and the other. And what I didn't realize was the power that comes with simply saying, this is enough in what it is, and thank you.
Thank
To
you.
whoever or whomever that may be you're thanking. But the act of gratitude is something which I have found has brought me abundant pleasure in my life. And I forget about it constantly. And I have to remind myself, this is pretty good. You should practice a bit of gratitude in this. And the minute that I do, I'm in a different headspace. I'm in a better headspace, a cleaner headspace, and a more joyful headspace. So I think if anything in this book speaks to me today, and it all still speaks to me, because it's all true in my life. But that chapter on gratitude is something which practically, it's like a lot of things, Rick, isn't it? It's the most simple things that we poo-poo, that we don't think work, are often the most profound, And I think that's true for me of that chapter on gratitude. And I go back to it again and again,
It's incredibly powerful insights about your own life and some of the struggles that you've shared with us. So I can't thank you enough. Now, John, I'd love to talk about, it seems to me that you've grown humble in all of this. Do you find yourself giving back more nowadays?
I think this book was an attempt to do that.
Of course.
I sat on this book for a decade.
Oh,
It
wow.
sat on, it sat on a manuscript, and latterly it sat on a memory stick for a long time. And twice I had come close to publishing it. When I first wrote it, I had a very impressive literary agent attached to it in London, and it was all ready to go ahead. And then my mother died, and I pulled away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2015, I looked at it again, and I was too busy. I wasn't ready to do it, and so I pulled away from it again. And so I think, if anything, the coronavirus crisis made us all think, what can I do? I'm not, we have a first minister in Scotland. I'm not the first minister. I'm not the president of America. I'm not the prime minister of Great Britain. I don't wield any power. I'm not a billionaire, so I can't hand hundreds of millions to the medical services to help them. So, I did register with the NHS as a volunteer, but I think so many people did. There was never a phone call, So you can feel a bit helpless, I think, during times like this.
Yes.
And that's where the idea of sort of publishing it came from. I thought, okay, this I can do. This I can do. If ever the world needed a book like this right now, the uncertainty that's around, the sense of helplessness that is, if I'm feeling it, everyone else is feeling it as well.
Yeah.
So if anything, the release of this book at this time was prompted by a desire to kind of do my bit, that Dunkirk spirit of, what can I do, that's practical and that makes a difference in people's lives. And so there is that. And, sure, there's, I try and do as much charity work as I sort of can. And I try to be as decent a human being as I can. But I think for now, for this period in time where we are so self-isolated from one another, there's less scope for the interpersonal, which is a shame. There's a lot of really lonely people out there right now. And I'm very pleased when you said that you felt that there was a voice there speaking to you, because I hope if anyone picks this book up, and I urge people to do so, if anyone picks this book up and finds that there is not only advice in there, but companionship in that book at a time when we are probably more lonely as a society than we've ever been, and really starved of touch and companionship and camaraderie and all that kind of stuff, then the book's kind of done its job.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It's wonderful feedback. It's making me feel a range of emotions. I'm all about helpful people helping people. I'll get it out in a minute. And I think through this book, it's certainly achieving that goal. Now, is this is only one of many parts? How many parts to this are there?
At the moment, I'm envisaging 3 volumes, possibly a 4th, but at the moment I'm envisaging 3. I'm about 90% done on the 2nd volume, and then it will go into a redraft stage and then editing stage. And I would like to think that I'm hoping to have that out for January of next year. I'm hoping, fingers crossed. But it's because I get a lot out of writing this. I'd love to say it was entirely altruistic, but I really enjoy doing it, Rick. I enjoy it, and I get pleasure out of it, and not just the act of writing, but the act of, there's an element of philosophy to this book, and I love the act of in my head sort of working through these issues and thinking, what does that mean, and how does that apply in reality, and how can I take the ephemeral and make it practical, and so there's an element of this sort of monkey puzzle about it for me as well that I really enjoy. So it's something that I mean, it could go on and on, I suppose. If people liked it and people want more of it, then there's no reason why it shouldn't extend beyond 3 volumes, but 3 is what I have planned at the moment.
Fantastic. Now, this is one of the core reasons, John, why I love having authors on the show. I've got a very special place in my heart for those who are willing to put pen to paper and share their life's experiences, and this book certainly does that. It's a wonderful piece of work. Thank you so very much for writing it. Now, John, importantly, when people want to get their hands on this wonderful book, where are they going to find it?
So at the moment, it's available through Amazon. It's available on ebook, and it's also available as a physical copy as well. And it's called Letters to My Former Self. Letters to My Former Self. And you'll find it on Amazon, whichever country you're in. So Amazon.com or Amazon.co.uk or wherever it is you're in, you'll obviously have your own version of Amazon, and you would need to log into the version for your country to be able to get it. But it's downloadable immediately if you enjoy reading things on the Kindle or I think the Nook is another one.
Yes.
There's quite a lot of these reading
readers,
modern appliances now. I'm still a fan of paper myself, but I know that people swear by these things. I do have one. I very seldom use it though. And you can also have my preference, which is a physical copy as well. The foreword is written by Patti Clare, who's a very famous actress in this country. She's in our longest running soaps called Coronation Street, and she's a deeply spiritual and very, very wise person herself. I've known her for many years. She's a very good friend of mine.
Amazing.
And she's written the foreword. So it's if you want to get it, pop onto Amazon and in your relevant country, and you'll be able to find it under Letters to My Former Self.
Incredible. Thank you so much, John. Now, everybody who's on the show with us today, you can just tell by the conversation we've just had that this is a book that you must get your hand on, especially now given, I guess, the tumultuous times we're going through right now. No matter where you find this interview, I will be doing my darndest to make sure the links back to John's wonderful book is available to you. And with all that being said, John, I have had an incredible time with you on the My Future Business show today.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the call, then make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, share us with your friends, and book your spot on the show at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. And if you're looking for solutions that will help grow your business, then visit myfuturebusiness.com/shop.